Miami, Florida, a little girl disappears while roller skating in an apartment near Dadeland Mall on February 3, 1990. The next morning, her body is found floating in a canal 12 miles from home. Who killed 8-year-old Kristen Gray? Special thanks to you/Turamali, who mentioned this case to me in a post last week and reignited my interest in it. Kristen Elizabeth Gray was a bright, spunky 8-year-old girl living in Miami, Florida with her mother and younger brother. A third grader at Ludlam Elementary School, she was a gifted student and junior Girl Scout who loved animals and the outdoors. Kristen's parents, Tom and Sue, separated when she was 2 years old. Shortly after that, Sue remarried to a man named Ron Shirk and went on to have another child, Stephen, in 1986. Ron and Sue divorced for unknown reasons in November 1989, and in December, he moved into a second-floor apartment at the Dadeland Capri Apartments, located behind the popular Dadeland Mall. Although he wasn't Kristen's biological father, having raised her since she was a toddler, Ron chose to remain involved in her life after the divorce. She loved to be outdoors, he told the Miami Herald. She loved to discover things. She loved fishing in shells in the ocean, and finding things in the woods. She loved to ride her bike a lot. Every Thursday and Friday, he would take her and Stephen to his apartment. On Saturday, February 3, 1990, Ron picked Kristen up to go to the beach while Sue stayed at home with Stephen. She was wearing a red sundress with a nautical symbol and a new pair of white and blue roller skates, which Sue had just bought that morning at a garage sale. She wasn't a very good skater, Sue recalled, but she was so thrilled with them that she hardly took them off at the beach. When they returned home at about 3 p.m., Kristen asked Ron if she could go outside to skate some more. He said yes, but told her to stay in second-floor hallway while he used the common laundry room at the west end of the corridor. Ron would later tell police that, each time he passed between his apartment and the laundry room, he checked on Kristen to make sure she was all right. The first few times he passed the hallway, he found her happily skating through the halls. When he passed by again at 4 p.m., she was gone. Knowing Kristen wasn't the type of child to wander off, Ron was immediately alarmed when he walked the second-floor hallway and realized she wasn't there. He began knocking on doors asking if anyone had seen her, growing more and more frantic as it became clear that no one had. He was in a panic, one neighbor recalled. He was saying, "Oh my God, did you see a little girl on skates?" He kept saying that. "Oh my God, oh my God." A small group of neighbors banded together to help search for Kristen, scouring the apartment complex, then the whole block, then the canal that separates the complex from Dadeland Mall. At 5:30 p.m., after finding no trace of the little girl, Ron called the police. At 8:30 a.m. the next morning, in a rural area of Homestead 12 miles southwest of the apartment complex, a fisherman looking for a spot to cast his line noticed what looked like a small mannequin floating face down in the Princeton Canal. Upon closer look, he realized it was the body of a small child, barefoot and wearing a red dress. An autopsy found that Kristen had been beaten, then manually strangled to death before being dumped in the canal. The white and blue roller skates, and her underwear, were missing, and would never be found despite multiple searches and dives in the canal. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed if she was sexually assaulted. Homicide detectives are used to grisly murder scenes and the emotional struggles that come with working them, but this felt different. "I have grandchildren her age," said Carol Howell, a 27-year veteran of Miami-Dade police force who worked in the Crime Stoppers office. "After so many years, it's hard to tell you what the feeling is, but when it involves children, it really hurts. The little ones can't take care of themselves." The discovery of Kristen's body set off a virtual manhunt for her killer. By June, police had interviewed over 1,000 people, from apartment residents to maintenance people who had ever worked at the complex. They set up roadblocks, reviewed every 911 call that took place in the area in the preceding months, caught up with local sex offenders. They investigated about a dozen suicides in hopes they could link one to Kristen's murder. As would be expected, detectives' suspicions immediately fell on Kristen's stepfather, Ron. Stereotypical stranger abductions are vanishingly rare, with only 100 or so taking place each year in the United States. Statistically, a child is far more likely to be murdered by a family member, and Ron and Sue had just divorced 3 months before Kristen's death. Most concerning was a witness who told detectives she saw Kristen skating in the halls between noon and 1 p.m., when Ron claims he was at the beach with her until 3 p.m. At the Dadeland Capri, the general belief was that Kristen's murder was, as one tenant put it, an inside job. "I still feel that it was an inside job," speculated 29-year-old Jeannie's Leslie. "Someone must have pulled her into an apartment, and when she cried out, they killed her. That's what scares me." One early morning in June, detectives surprised residents of the Dadeland Capri apartments with a voluntary blood draw. They had found blood at one of the crime scenes, but declined to say which. Although residents were cooperative, several expressed concern that the blood draw was happening too late, noting that many people had moved out of the complex since the murder. Ron and Sue tried to help, too. With their help, 5,000 flyers were plastered all over Southwest Miami. When Crime Stoppers contacted them to ask if they wanted to participate in a reenactment, they jumped at the chance. And still, nothing. Most homicide investigations take a direction. This one never did, said Detective Joe McMahon. We don't know whether she was done in by a sex offender or was in the wrong place at the wrong time and saw something she shouldn't have. Sadly, it seems that there has been little progress in the case since the initial investigation. Sometime around 2010, detectives received a promising anonymous tip, but it was not enough to lead to an arrest. As far as suspects go, no one has ever been charged or even named a person of interest in Kristen's case. Despite the witness sighting that seems to contradict Ron's story, there is no solid evidence, at least publicly known, pointing to him as Kristen's killer. There have been no allegations of abuse against him, and a public records search indicates he hasn't been in any serious trouble since 1990. If there is evidence implicating Ron, law enforcement has never talked about it publicly. Today, Kristen would be 36 years old. She would be turning 37 next month, on July 11th. That's a pretty rotten person, to kill a kid and then just throw them, try to hide a body in a canal, Sue told NBC Miami in 2010. I hope that the information that someone's holding on to gets to the detectives and they can make an arrest, and we can sleep better. Kristen is an angel. She is in heaven and I believe I will see her again someday.
Not exactly the same, but this reminds me of the kidnapping of Nicole Morin from Toronto, Canada, who went down to meet her friend who was waiting at the bottom floor of Nicole's apartment as they had plans to swim at the pool on site. Nicole's body was never found. I agree that in both cases, to me it seems as though it was someone within the building and a crime of opportunity. Thank you for the write-up. Had never heard of this case and plan to read up on her sad case more.
I actually lived right next to these apartments. Just a year after this happened. I was way too young to remember this case, but I do remember my family telling me to never wander into that complex. My grandparents also used to live in the townhouses next to our apartment complex. There were a lot of small apartment, townhome, condo complexes at that time in the area. There also was a sort of back road that you could use to get access to other areas but was really only used by super locals. You only used that if you lived in that immediate area because it wasn't a commonly traveled area. And the highway is right there. A fence was between the back road and the highway, but using that road took you to an on-ramp not too far. I even went to the same school. I'm up for any questions people might have. We stayed there in that area for almost a decade around this case before moving to other parts of Miami.
When was the last time anyone other than Ron saw her alive?
Under the official timeline, nobody. The only other person who says they saw Kristen at the apartment says they saw her at 1 p.m. If they're right about the time, that blows a hole in Ron's story, which is that he didn't return home from the beach with Kristen until 3 p.m.
Based on this write-up, I think it was a stranger in the apartment complex. Maybe that person had seen Kristen before and, in the sickest of ways, liked her. They saw the opportunity when she was alone skating by and grabbed her. I'd bet this person, likely male, was in his late 30s, early 40s. Unemployed, maybe recently fired. And this person probably moved away from the area shortly after the crime. I wouldn't be surprised if this person committed another similar crime in another city. Not sure why I get these vibes, but I do.
I live in Miami and never heard of this case. Very sad. I lived an apartment a block away from that address, and area is very safe, although Miami has a very transient population. How closely was stepfather looked into? It would take an hour to drive from apartment address to where she was found.
Hi neighbor. I agree, it is a very safe area. There isn't much serious crime around Kendall Drive in general. Probably why it was so shocking when it happened, but I don't know if the crime rate around Dadeland Mall was different circa 1990. When did you live there? I don't know how closely the police looked into Ron. I could find little to no solid information about suspects in general. The most I could find were some unverified posts online that either say he was completely cleared or is still Lee's top suspect. Nothing concrete. I wonder if the blood at the crime scene was ever DNA tested. That would be the quickest way to prove Ron's innocence, or guilt.
Realistically, if they did return at 3 and he raised the alarm about 4, it wasn't the stepfather. It would take about 1 to 2 hours round trip to dump the body. Since she was found in the early hours of the morning, I doubt he had a chance to sneak away and dump her in the interim. Even if she was seen skating at 1, that still only gives about 3 hours. Which is not a lot of time to kill a child, smuggle her out of an apartment, drive 12 miles, dump her and return. Plus, while generally a recently divorced partner might seem the obvious suspect, this seems to have been amicable. The fact that Ron and Sue combined efforts in putting up flyers tells me she certainly didn't think it was him. Barring sexual abuse that nobody knew about, I really can't see it being the stepfather in this particular case. It just doesn't sit right. I could buy that he didn't check on her as often as he thought. This really seems like it might have been a crime of opportunity.
I am also reminded of Nicole Morin by this case, and feel that the most likely explanation is that she was snatched from the hallway by a stranger who lived there. She was inside the building, on the 2nd floor no less, so that makes abduction by an outsider unlikely in my opinion. I don't really get the sense that Ron was involved, but I did consider the fact that he might have a motive. He and Kristen's mother had gotten divorced just a few months beforehand. This may have been a way to get back at Kristen's mother, depending on the circumstances of the divorce. Absolutely horrible to consider, but the thought crossed my mind. I really don't believe he did it though.
So, what do you think happened to Kristen Gray? Share your theory in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.